the father of the Sea Ranch. This is sponsored by the Sea Ranch Vision Committee, and we welcome you all. Today is a tribute to Al, to whom we all must forever be grateful for having had the foresight and tenacity to enable Sea Ranch to happen. Alfred Anton Boeke was born in Denver on November 20th, 1922. He died November 8th, 2011, just shy of his 89th birthday. As most of you know, Al was working for the Hawaiian company Castle & Cook when he saw the future Sea Ranch property from a small airplane in the early 1960s. There's much to tell about a person who's lived such a long life. I've asked our wonderful speakers to keep their talks to 10 to 15 minutes. I have a timer. If you hear a beep, you'll know what that's all about. Okay, so we have three wonderfully unique, diverse speakers today who will speak about Al's life and his accomplishments. Al's story begins. It's my great pleasure to introduce to the podium Donlyn Lyndon, part of the original architectural team at the Sea Ranch, which Al hired. Donlyn.
Thank you for organizing this assembly and the opportunity to do some thinking about the numerous qualities that were important about Al. And you'll be relieved to know that I'm only going to speak some of them. Somehow this. And in fact, in fear of her little timer, I've written this out so as to be capable of restricting myself properly. One of the marvelous ways of thinking about a place is to reflect upon its founding, about the acts of imagining that have taken root in the soil. All across the country, we live in the traces of imaginings, places where some thoughts took hold. Farms, villages, towns, cities, parks, plantations, preserves, wildernesses bounded. Each started with the seed of an idea. This could become that. Each has grown from something already there and a spade in the earth. Always know you know them now as the result of many people's initiatives and care. Al Boeke planted the seed that has become the Sea Ranch. More than that, he set out the terms of its nurture. It has become what it is because he also knew it would need many kinds of imagination to make it take hold, and set out to invest it from the start with a process that could garner the nutrients of thought and shape and guide its growth into a place about which many could care and which would retain the elements of its conception. Al, then Vice President for Oceanic Properties, was the first to see its unique development potential and to take it in hand, prompting, gathering, and furthering the thoughts of many colleagues and consultants into the shape of an idea that could grow and branch and reach into the future. We owe an immeasurable debt to Al Boeke's leadership. It's immeasurable not only because of the scope of his contributions, but because it was embedded within the many processes that he initiated and directed. The early work here involved an exceptionally broad team of consultants and planners and county agencies. That work then had to be coordinated and explained to his own parent company, to his board of directors in Hawaii, as well as to the ranchers from whom the land was being purchased, who were a bit skeptical. On-site staff were sometimes misguided, and those who came after development, those of us, to purchase their own stake in the vision he had guided into a fledgling reality. The clarity and certainty that he projected was an important part of the success. That and the astuteness of his vision, an understanding of what it would take to get it done. He provided a beacon of leadership and judgment that rallied the imagination and expertise of many. Its reflections permeate our lives here. In the oral history that Al has given to the Bancroft Library at the University of California, he recounts how as a young architect, just beginning, he took a trip to Sweden, visiting the new towns there, leading examples of modern town planning and development just then completed in a place where aspiring architects went. He became convinced that he wanted his career, convinced through looking at those towns and the scope of it, that he wanted his career to be one that would be more than simply making buildings. He wished to reach out for larger goals, make something of greater significance. The Sea Ranch was, for Al, not just a project, but a way of fulfilling that intention. I happened to be reading that passage from the oral history while in Sweden a couple of years ago. By coincidence, I was shown that same day by the director of the Sustainable Urban Design Program in Lund University there, a magazine that is the Scandinavian equivalent of Dwell, which included an article on 17 places around the world that must be seen to study sustainable development. The second one was the image of the Sea Ranch. A view from Black Point looking back towards Condominium 1. The publication brought evidence of his intention, full circle back to Sweden, as other earlier publications had carried it into the corners of the globe. Now, Boeke was an inspiring and demanding client, determined that the Sea Ranch would make its mark as part of something more. His was a profound and compelling certainty. Reverdy Johnson, in his fine comments for the Bulletin, refers to Al as our own Robert Moses. I would disagree, only in that Robert Moses, the planner who transformed much of greater New York City, was known for powerful big moves that left no room for, had no truck with, the local and specific. Whereas the largeness of Al's thought absorbed and respected the specifics of what was here. This had both to do what he first saw looking down from that legendary plane ride, spectacular bluffs, meadows defined by hedgerows and forests, and even more from what he then learned through treks across the knobby land and into the dense forest, as well as through examining remaining ranch structures, and from encounters with the knowing and gritty spirit of the families that settled and ranched the land, Ed Olson in particular. He made these the foundation for a large and inclusive vision of what the place could become. As Reverdy goes on to say, Al was without equal in conceiving of a project, in our case the Sea Ranch, and then assembling a pool of extraordinary talent to implement. While, Reverdy says, I never saw him shrink from expressing his views, in which I could concur, he had the great wisdom to give his appointed, or anointed, consultants the charge to implement his vision, and then to keep only a gentle hand on the creative process. Well, maybe not always so gentle, but certainly firm, knowing, and effective. The creative process he and Larry Halpern fostered among the rest of the professional planning, design, and implementation team was contagious and immensely productive, taking us all into realms we had not quite entered before, laying the groundwork for what was to come. 5 decades later, the place keeps evolving under informed stewardship, answering still to a guiding vision for the place and absorbing the interests of many. How did he himself define his role at the time? In an address to the Southern California chapter of the American Institute of Architects in 1966, Al described it this way: "My business and professional life is a hash in various amounts and qualities of hard-nosed developer, urban designer, architect, environmental evangelist, real estate economist, policeman of program and quality, and juggler of the manager's problems. My role is one of creating good fit, the marriage of form and content." We should note that this account was given not only from his experience here, but from the previous far-sighted work for Oceanic Properties, leading an array of large-scale projects, including Mililani Town in Hawaii. He became, in those years, an eloquent and articulate advocate, calling for architects, planners, and developers to widen their scope and pay more attention to the public good, asking the industry, quote, to think of a new, quote, product, neighborhoods, not just houses. About the Sea Ranch, he continued, "It has always been our interest to maintain a continuity of open space from forest to sea, and the natural integrity of the site to permeate the man-made objects. Dynamic conservation is the label that we have placed upon what we are about there. Its architecture is generated from the indigenous qualities of place, ecology, history, local materials, way of life, all active as givens to the physical designer, who can see, feel, sense, comprehend the opportunity to mold a mature architecture. Our buildings will not be lost in a city or absorbed in an urban frontier. It is fundamental then that they are mature and a good fit." Since this occasion is a celebration of a marvelous life and a generous and folding spirit, not a memorializing of Al's greatness or a definitive account of the founding of the Sea Ranch, there's no point to trying to separate within the team's work who said what, who imagined how, or from which brow the creative sparks were most wont to fly. Wit and wisdom, certainty, doubt, investigation, and clarification were all part of the mix, steadied by Al's constant quest for a place that would embody new ways to understand, steward, enjoy, and inhabit this splendid natural landscape. Al Boeke's spirit lives within it. We can celebrate it most appropriately by gathering the will to steward the Sea Ranch with a determination worthy of his example. In his closing remarks for the oral history recorded in 2008, Al noted, "The Sea Ranch is here. It's a going institution. Being a part of the community and having part of the joint responsibility of maintenance and care, it's a real bang for your buck. It's one of the finest places you can live together with others and share the responsibilities for it. Almost a private community." He goes on, "And they mix, and they talk, and they do stuff. And I guess I should say I am proud of it. Of that we can all be certain."
I've lost my first page.
Did I see it?
In any
Yes,
case,
I did. I didn't have enough pages, so you can actually...
thank you, Donlyn. It is now my great pleasure to welcome to the podium Steve Weingarten. Steve was a nephew of Charles Moore, still is, and he watched Condo 1 being built in the early 60s, so he's got a wonderful viewpoint on our beloved Sea Ranch. Steve.
Make this a little taller. Okay. That sounds pretty good. Yeah, it's true. I was and still am Charles Moore's nephew, In fact, that's the accomplishment that brings me here to the barn today, because my mother was Charles Moore's sister, which made Charles Moore my Uncle Chuck. See, that's how it works. And that wasn't really hard for me to accomplish. In fact, it kind of was part of my job description. So anyway, sometimes it's better to be lucky than to be really good, and I've always really happily accepted these genetic circumstances, and it's fully my intent to continue to enjoy them. One aspect of this good fortune for me was that I got to experience the Sea Ranch from its infancy, kind of right up to right now. And another piece of good fortune was that about 8 years ago, finally, I got introduced to, got to meet and got to become good friends with Al Boeke. Anyway, rather than get all historical, because, you know, the dignitaries can do that, and I don't know much about it anyway, I'd like to roll out some mostly fact-based speculations on what it might have been like for Al after seeing that undeveloped stretch that was the Del Mar Ranch from the window of that famed little Cessna 50 years ago. So this will kind of be like a mini docudrama of how the Sea Ranch got started. So, you know, and we're not bounded by fact here, okay? And I employed no fact checkers. Anyway, so Al sees the ranch from his Cessna, and they take him back to San Francisco, and the next day he drives up to this area. It was the Del Mar Ranch at the time, to take a closer look. And he totally loves what he sees. And he develops this dream of a community way, way out there, up the coast of Northern California. But it wasn't the dream the development company, Castle and Cook, employed him to dream. Al's dream was way outside of the box. Outside of the box wasn't even a phrase back then. That's how far outside of the box Al was. And his dream was so strong that to properly call it what it is, it was more like a vision. And so, anyway, Al flies back to Hawaii, where Castle and Cook are located. They're a division, by the way, of Dole Pineapple. And he reports back on what he's seen and his vision for what it might become. And he speaks with fervor and eloquence to the members of the board. And perhaps it was his persuasiveness combined for being a good year for pineapples, but at the end of the day, they give him the green light and things are set in motion. Al was 40 years old. He had an elevated vision of a new community on an extraordinary piece of land at the end of civilization as they knew it. And he had financial backing. I've seen pictures of Al from that time, and he was a young lion. And he proceeded to seek out other young lions with whom he could work and who could share his vision of a development that first and foremost honored this miraculous stretch of coastline. And he came up with Esherick and Halpern, Moore, Lyndon, Turnbull, Whitaker, and a host of other very talented people who shared his concerns. To me, the creation of the Sea Ranch comes across as kind of a fable. I'm thinking The Wizard of Oz. So, hang with me. If you could think of Highway 1 as the yellow brick road, and think of how it was in 1962, an uneven, windy, potholed stretch that was just barely clinging to a cliff high above the Pacific Ocean, and then you think about the real yellow brick road to Oz, where you had to negotiate your way through lions and tigers and bears and fields of poison poppies and flying monkeys. Well, it's kind of a wash, don't you think? But the difficulty of the journey was also a measure of the commitment that these very talented people gave to this project. They had to make the journey to make the project happen. That's kind of fable-like. Al set the bar at the height of his elevated vision, and his colleagues, lions that they were, put their best into the vertical leap to reach that elevated place. Dick Whitaker told me a story of how sometime in 1963, M, L, T, and W were sitting on the beautifully barren, windswept land where Condominium 1 now resides. And the question came up, how could anyone ethically erect any structure on a spot that was so stunningly beautiful in its natural state? And the answer, which apparently came from several places at once, was that if they didn't do it, somebody else would come along and they would do it, and they would really screw it up. I cleaned up Dick's language. I'm thinking that Al must have been going through the very same thought process, how to proceed in a development without compromising the remarkable beauty of the environment, and at some time answer to a board of directors whose eyes started at the bottom line and worked backwards from there. This must have caused Al to lose some sleep at night. So then, it's 1966, I'm 13 years old, living in Monterey, and after hearing Uncle Chuck talk about someplace called the Sea Ranch for a couple of years, it's time for the family to drive up and check the place out. The road is spooky, it takes forever, I'm probably car sick, but finally we arrive, and there is Condo 1 like a mini Oz, standing there alone on the bluff. And we go inside unit number 9, and my mostly closed, early teenage mind is blown. I've never encountered an interior space even remotely like the one in condo number 9. At that point, few people had. Later, Uncle Chuck referred to it as space that leaped up and out. It was elevated in all senses. It almost tickled. I had dreams of flying in that space, buzzing around like a hummingbird, exploring. Perhaps Al had similar dreams. My uncle described Condo 1 as the most favorite thing he'd ever done. This was in the late 80s, and this is major praise coming from him. To have all of these remarkable people with all of these ideas converge at one remarkable location, and to see these ideas take form, well, there you have it. Condo 1, a little postmodern Emerald City. And this was to be the prototype for all things to come at the Sea Ranch. Al's vision in ascension. He must have been thrilled. And for me, inside my uncle's condo, the smell of pitch from the recently milled massive fir posts and timbers hung in the air like incense, and I breathed it in, and in my psyche, I registered it as the smell of optimism. This is what vitality and expansive space and expansive thought smell like. So, not unsurprisingly, a decade later, I end up in nearby Mendocino County, and I become a builder and a designer of structures. What do you know about that? And I could easily trace that progression of events back to the first time I encountered Condo 1 and stepped into a world of possibilities. Those early times at the Sea Ranch quietly described what form my life would assume for decades to follow. And I know I'm not alone in this. The story is so often repeated that it's become a cliche. A couple that takes a drive up the coast to beat the inland heat, and they stumble across the Sea Ranch and are staggered by its beauty in all senses. And then they spend the next decade trying to figure out how they can afford to live here. They go home, and what they dream of is the Sea Ranch. This is people changing the course of their lives in order to make the opportunity to live here. And perhaps this was part of Al's dream as well when he was dreaming about the Sea Ranch a half of a century ago. So we fast forward to 2004. Pam and Al are collaborating on a proposal which will ultimately culminate with Condo 1 being given the honor of placement on the National Register of Historical Places. This is most remarkable because the only other time in history where a structure has made it to this list, there was only one other time a structure made it to this list while the architects of that structure were still alive. Donlyn, hang in there. Finally, in the midst of this process, I get to meet Al. At the time, I had no idea about his place in the scheme of the Sea Ranch. He was simply a name I breezed over a couple of times while reading about how the place got started. He was no longer the young lion from his early Sea Ranch days, but he sure had some lion in him. And if you squinted a little, you could catch some of that star quality he must have had when he was telling the corporate gang at Castle and Cook how to spend their money. He had that mid-20th century decorum of a Cary Grant, the quiet resoluteness and certainty of a Gary Cooper, the passion and the conscience of a Jimmy Stewart to go along with that lean build of his, which was not unlike the Scarecrow or the Woodsman. He might not have done westerns well because I don't see him on a horse. But over time, and with some regularity, whenever I was dealing with stuff down there at Condo 1, I'd stop by and I'd have dinner with Al and Pam, and Al and I would exchange recollections. It was like picking up parts of a conversation we'd had in the past, only we'd never had these conversations before. Both of us were familiar with the time frames and the players and the circumstances and the politics. We just hadn't run into each other before. And for me, if the Sea Ranch can be considered part of my genetic DNA helix, and it can, then by association, Al was part of my genetics as well. And he felt that way to me. My biggest faux pas with Al came one night when I made the offhand comment that I thought a couple of the beams in Condo 1 may have been overspanned. I was glad he wasn't packing. Because for the next several minutes, he gave me a stern and pointed lecture about all the calculations and engineering and field tests that was done to make Condo 1 structurally sound. And I think I was much quieter for the rest of the evening. Whatever the years had taken from him, when you talked about a passion of his passion always returned. At another point, one of those evenings at Pam's place, she took me aside to let me know that Al didn't suffer fools lightly, but because he liked me, he'd make an exception. Of course, I was honored. I, like many others, felt Al's passing deeply. His connection to the Sea Ranch defies simple categories. It was way, way more than his job. It was more than aesthetics or structures or regulations or politics or the emotions tied into all these things. The exhaustive environmental studies he undertook spoke of how he listens to the land, how he asked the land to speak to him, how he took the land's advice. This, to my understanding, was without precedent in a development of this size. His role in conceiving and then implementing that which has become known as the Sea Ranch was the act of Al putting his entire being into the project. Physical, spiritual, and then whatever else he had left over at the end of the day. He put it all in. Al was the point of origin. The untamed Del Mar Ranch could easily have become Stinson Beach North or Irish Beach South. Think about that. But, you know, perhaps the greatest tribute to Al comes from the fact that we have all been drawn to this place. We've traversed our own yellow brick roads to get here. And whatever compelling vibes he started broadcasting when he first dreamed about a community up here, They are still humming, bent but not broken, still elevated 50 years later, alive and well. So thank you, Al, and thank you folks for listening.
Thank you, Steve. And it is my great pleasure now to welcome to the podium Milford Wayne Donaldson. He's the State of California's Historic Preservation Officer from the Office of Historic Preservation. Wayne.
I'll have to take this a little bit down.
Sorry.
That's okay. By the way, the condo 1 unit 3 that Lori and I purchased back in February still smells like pitch. So.
Good.
In a very short time, a 50-year-old historical event will repeat itself. Well, at least in a symbolic manner. In 1962, as hundreds of sheep scattered, frightened by the drone of a twin-engine Cessna, circling overhead above Olson Ranch, Al Boeke told the pilot, "I don't want to look at anything else." It was the conception of the Sea Ranch. And as most of you know, in a small aircraft, it's practically impossible to conceive anything. 50 years ago and later today, with the permission of pilot Tom Osborne, Al, because he's so darn compulsive, will leave Tom's plane and join us here at the Sea Ranch. Ashley Montague once said, "The ideal is to die young, as late as possible." And like all of us at Sea Ranch, Al was forever young. Alfred Anton Boeke, the son of Alfred and Ada Boeke, in the early 1920s, first knew the world as a place of open plains and the quiet streets of Denver, was eventually thrown into the greater Los Angeles basin of creative geniuses. In a romantic environment of mission architecture, orange trees, and as historian Kevin Starr once said, reinventing the community dream of the Spanish dons. Growing up in the Great Depression, serving in the Army's 58th Armored Infantry Division during World War II, where the motto was, "Love of country," Al, supported by a GI Bill, earned a bachelor's degree in architecture from the prestigious University of Southern California in 1948. He had the ability and luck to work for Richard Neutra and Robert Alexander in the early 50s before opening his own firm, Boeke and Kinsley, in 1955. But more importantly, as a visiting lecturer at USC, he was surrounded by the most influential designers, planners, and architects in the modernist movement, influenced the profession worldwide. Greats like Charles and Ray Ames, Craig Elwood, Ed Killingsworth, Whitney Smith, Garrett Ekbo, Frederick Emmons, William Worcester, Pierre Koenig, and a person I can sort of deal with because I had to spend some time on his houseboat, Rafael Soriano. All of these influenced Al's work. But 3 years before the Olson Ranch, as most of you have heard, he was hired by Castle & Cook, the real estate company under the Dole Food Company in 1959. One of the reasons that Dole Food Company was looking at hiring Al was because a lot of their lands now were being vacated. Pineapple industry wasn't what it was, so they're looking at new developments in isolated lands. So as he was the developer director, the Mililani, Hawaii planned community of 38,000 residents was formed in Oahu. But unlike architects, at that time, Al said, without respecting the owner and your consultants, the architect makes a fundamental mistake. Find out the things you're stuck with before putting down a design. Al's deepest beliefs never had much to do with fashion or convenience. As most of you know, his traditional cowboy stance, with his hands in his pockets and his thumbs in his belt loops, says it all. His convictions were always politely stated, quietly argued, and rooted deeply in his convictions as our rugged cypress hedgerows. He always let everyone voice their opinions. He was thoughtful, kind, but as a leader, he was always very comfortable in making the final decisions. So following his return from visiting several new towns in Scandinavia, he had the vision of a future and just how he was going to build it. He noted, not a recreational community for destination and play, but a meditative, a quiet community just for regular folks. And his enthusiasm was so great that he just swept everybody along with him. It's interesting, however, that his first development area he considered was Simi Valley, inland from Ventura. However, frustrated by the quality of design in Southern California, he moved north in his quest. If Al really wanted something, he kept going until he achieved it. Al was an uncompromising giant, unafraid to tackle controversial issues and explore the human condition through his unique vision. Like Mark Twain, who said, "I will never send my reader to a dictionary," he disliked the architectural cootsy pie invented phrases of stuffy architects and pipe-smoking Newtown planners, saying, "I just won't use them." Al was indeed a communicator. Imaginative, passionate, receptive, experimental, impatient, meticulous, resilient, relaxed, friendly, persuasive, dedicated, conscientious, compulsive, and most of all, loving. This was a report by a psychologist. Too dull. These were all words that were attached to Al throughout the wondrous variety that was his life. But they feel inadequate to describe a larger-than-life man who changed the rules of community development forever with his vision of this sea range. Al merged artistic real estate development with environmental and ecologically oriented community living, melding his stark, independent vision with others in a way that no other architectural genius has managed to accomplish and may never succeed in doing again. Al originated the concept of bringing the best visionaries together, not just in architecture, landscape architecture, planning, civil engineers, graphic design, as most developers during the 60s were doing, but he brought along attorneys, marketing experts, geologists, public relations, psychologists, historians, ranchers, environmentalists, and ecologists. And this dream of 15 played, fought, partied, discussed, cussed, and designed their way into history led by one man, Al Boeke. I met Al only 7 years ago when he was preparing the nomination of Condo 1 to the National Register of Significance, which was placed on there at the national level of significance. That's only one rung below a National Historic Landmark and only one rung below a national park. I saw his light for being young, his darkness for the Coastal Commission, his sweetness for playing outdoors, his roughness of maintaining his sense of place, his gentleness for the ones he loved, his anger now and then against the design committee, his architectural brilliance, his beauty, but most of all, his basic and bone-deep goodness and deep affection for mankind. Al was a courtly, gentle, and considerate man, never known to slight or embarrass others. But the other side of this coin was that he loved people. He had that great leader's capacity to bring out the best in people. He had the great humanist capacity to inspire people, to cheer them, and to give them lift. Al wanted people to come to Sea Ranch for the beauty, but stay for the community. Al also noted that no amount of design review can give spirit to a lifeless design. His goal was always to create a set of intentions through the CC&Rs, not rules. These concepts, he said, should attempt to link things together in a stewardship of place. The architecture, the wind, the sun, the landscape, the animals, all together rather than separate, isolated, standalone designs. 50 years down the road, the Sea Ranch is still unfolding, settling, coming to life. A testimony to Al's visions. Al always said, we are not living lightly on the land, which has become a model now and then. He kept insisting we're living lightly with the land. This concept was brilliant. Now, people often disagreed with Al, including me, but not almost never hated him. And this, I think, was because he himself was a man who did not know how to hate. Sure, he could be incensed by a cause such as coastal access, but he could not hate a person. He could disagree strongly, even passionately, but never personally. When people disagreed with him, he never thought of them as enemies. He just simply thought to himself, well, they're just stupid and they really don't understand. As Al struggled in preparing his incredible oral history of life and the development of the Sea Ranch, Al would always write cute little notes to himself after reading a current transcript and being frustrated. I found one such note, and here's what he wrote to himself. This is not the real Al Boeke, but a far lesser articulate and incoherent one. The facts, while fumbling, are correct, but there appears to be a high percentage of brain cells that come and go. And he goes on and ends with, but maybe honest vanity is valid here. This is Al Boeke at 83 in his finest moment. Al didn't leave the Sea Ranch when he died. He leaves the Sea Ranch when we die. So when the sun sets tonight off of our beautiful and majestic coast of California, and Al settles into his beloved Sea Ranch, this great American story will continue through us and our children and our grandchildren. So Al, you young grand spirit, in a short time, we will go outside together and gather your love as it descends on the sea range. Blue skies and tail winds, Al, we love you.
I'm embarrassed I even thought about a timer for these three gentlemen. Their speeches were talks and remembrances were absolutely marvelous. Thank you very, very much. We now have set some time aside for personal remembrances and comments. If any of you would like to come up to the podium, because Walt Custer is recording this, it's suggested that you come up and speak here. But I'm not sure how many old timers are here who remember Al or who had personal experiences, but who would like to start? Lee, do you want to? Oh, sorry.
On the way up here, I felt sort of miffed. I thought the three speakers had somehow plagiarized my thoughts. And then I decided they'd simply pre-validated some of what I want to share with you. So I felt much better then. I wanted to talk to you about two aspects of Al. One is the fellow of vision and courage and character. And I'll try to illustrate what I mean by that. It takes a visionary to look out of a little airplane at a sheep ranch and see the sea ranch. I don't think even under the influence I could do that. And then he had the courage to go out and tell people about this vision he had. That doesn't always go over so well, but beyond that, he had the character and the strength of character to pursue it, to sell it to his bosses in Hawaii, and to finish that effort in style. To extend the cowboy metaphor, I think he showed true grit. Forgive me. Another aspect of that, I think, is that when I was in business and management, we used to say, first-raters hire first-rate associates, second-raters hire third-raters because they hear footsteps. Clearly, Al wanted to go far, fast, and well. And if you look at just a partial list of the people, you get a sense of that, because you do have Moore, Lyndon, Turnbull, Whitaker, Eschrick, Halprin, George Holmesy, and on. I don't mean to leave anybody out, but it shows his willingness not only to vision or envision, but his desire to populate that vision and effort with great talent and folks who didn't lack the courage to envision with him and to pursue it. So I liked those. I didn't know him in those days, but he could talk at some length about those days and tell you about the many twists and turns and efforts, and it was always enjoyable. The second thing I'd like to share with you about Al that I thought was very nice, he had a wonderful smile. And you might be talking about something and it would bring up a remembrance or something that he liked. And he would smile and his whole face would light up. And it kind of filled, his face would fill with that smile, and you could sense that joy, that youthful joy and enthusiasm that was still there, still young. And through that, you got a glimpse, I think, of the infectious kind of personality, ambition, enthusiasm, willingness to dream of a person who was a doer and a leader and a motivator who could help others share. And I think sometimes we forget the sheer simple power of a smile and that kind of enthusiasm and joy that it brings into the room and into the effort. I like those things about him. I'll let others share some of their thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, people, now's your chance. Well, we've certainly all gotten some good insight into Al. I think we're going to walk away knowing more about the man than we ever did. This has been terrific. On the program, you will notice that Tom Osborne is going to do a flyover with Al's ashes. Unfortunately, there was a death in Tom's family, and he's in Texas this week, so we won't be doing the flyover today, but it will be done at a later time in a more private setting. We thank Tom for his volunteering to do this. Time for food. We have wonderful food from Trinks. You'll notice in the back by the wine, there's a North Coast Red by Cape Red, and they sent that case of red wine unannounced. They thought so much of Al, they think so much of Sea Ranch. Jack and Dolores Cape Red have been longtime owners of Sea Ranch property. So we thank them for that. My additional thank yous certainly go to the Vision Committee, to Walt Custer for once again filming for us, Kristen Carnes, John Horn, Henrik Lisberg, and too many others to mention. No more comments? Let's eat.
I have a comment. Without Patty Matson, this really would not have happened. She put the whole thing together in a beautiful, effortless way. I and all of us have to give her a great big hand.
All right, food is down there by Trinks. We've got wine and coffee, it's decaf coffee, and have a good time. Here's to Al.